always feel very awkward when I stand up and speak because I never quite know what to say to engage people. People have heard my story and they've listened to what I've got to say, and nobody wonders more than me just why people engage with me. Why is it people engage with me? I don't know. Do they want to hear the same story? Do they want to hear my story? I'm never 100% sure. So if you've never heard from me before, would you put your hand up? Okay, so there's a few hands, so I'll skim over my history just to fill you in on that. And the hope of me coming and speaking to you is that I can sway one mind, plant a seed in someone's mind, that they go away and they cultivate that seed just by simply looking and finding out more truths. I've never been a deeply religious guy. I believe, I like to think there must be a creator, and we're all here by some sort of design, and I suspect we've all been lied to for a very, very long time. One of the pieces, the snippets I take from scripture is Ecclesiastes 1:18, and that reads, with knowledge comes sorrow, and with greater knowledge comes a greater sorrow. And I think nobody feels that more than me. And one of the side effects of me speaking out, and I first spoke out nearly 4 years ago, and I can tell you that was from a very, very lonely place at the time. Everyone said I was mad. I put my funeral home on the line, and my friends all dropped me like shitty sticks. And it was a lonely place, but then I came here today and you can see a room of like-minded souls, and I don't feel on my own anymore, and I draw great comfort from that. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's John and I'm a funeral director. I used to be an engineer many years ago, and I had a good number, and I got laid off after 12 years, and I thought, what else can I do? I had a mortgage and a baby on the way. I was a late starter. He was an IVF baby. I was 42 when I had my son Tom, and I thought, what can I do where I'm not stuck in a factory, because I get bored easily. My mind is always thinking of different things, and I wanted something that was really worthwhile, and I wanted something where I would never get laid off again, and I decided to pursue undertaking. And the way I did that was I googled all the local funeral directors, and I then drove around with a suit on and a covering letter on some nice posh parchment paper I'd bought, and I knocked on doors and I asked about, how do you get a job in the funeral industry? I'm an engineer, I'm smart, I'm polite, I'm well mannered, I'm compassionate, I've got empathy. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I got a job with the co-op, and I did 10 years with the co-op. Market leader, they had around 50% market share, and the first 5 years was really good, and then the co-op bank went under and collapsed, and they brought the money men in, and it was all about money, and I felt really from day one that I kind of fell into my natural thing, my vocation. Quite often people say to me, I could never do your job. And don't get me wrong, sometimes if you have any empathy or compassion about you, then someone coming in broken hearted, especially when I'm 56 now, I've lost people that I love, so I've had life experience. When you see someone crying and they're bereft, inevitably you can feel your own throat tighten if you've got anything about you, and certainly as an empathetic, compassionate man, it upsets me to see people upset. But I kind of put a positive spin on it, because I go home from work and I think, well, I've done something really worthwhile and I've had a really good day, because look, and you draw positives from it. During the 10 years I spent with the co-op, I did 7 years for the Coroner. So the way that worked was, I went into work one day, and my manager, he said to me, I've got some really good news. And I said, oh, what's that? He said, we've got a new contract. We've got the Coroner's contract. And he gave me a mobile phone. And I never forget one of the old boys, the funeral directors at the back of the room, I see him roll his eyes and groan. So he obviously I've turned something. Hello? I thought I turned myself off, sorry. So he rolled his eyes, and he obviously realised what was going on. I was quite excited, you know. Oh, a new contract, and what it involved was this mobile phone would ring, and it would be the police control room, and they would say, we've had an RTA, a road traffic accident, junction 1 to 2 on the A14. Off you go. So there you'd be driving down the road at 3 in the morning, and you could see blue lights in the distance, and you know, it was kind of like a magical mystery tour without any fun whatsoever. And you would turn up, and they would say to you, I want you to pick up every bit bigger than an inch. And there you were in the dark, picking up ear holes and lips and God knows what. And it wasn't a very nice job. But what it was a rude awakening into the inside and outs of people. And I've seen the inside of more people than anyone in general practice. You know, I've had doctors come to my funeral home and they've got no idea what they're looking at. They've never seen a deceased. And they're there to inspect a deceased and do cremation paperwork, you know, laughable. But, you know, I've sat and watched GPs Google my symptoms. This is where we are in 2024. So, anyway, I did 10 years with the co-op, and I ended up jumping ship because I wasn't happy with the way they were doing things, and it was all designed really to prop the bank up. The debt that the bank had accrued, and so I set up on my own, and that was 8 years ago, and I've had my own funeral home ever since. Now, for me, COVID first began in around 2019, and it was kind of November, December time, and I'm kind of going over ground. I know most of you have heard this before, but this is for the benefit of people that haven't. And I had a family come to see me who'd lost loved ones in Northampton, which is like the neighbouring borough. I operate out of Milton Keynes. And they complained that the hospital wouldn't allow them to see their loved one in the chapel of rest. And the way that works is when you lose someone, and as a society, especially lately, we're very good at getting people to pass away in hospital, aren't we? So to put that into context, if I had 10 families that came to see me who'd lost someone, 8 of them would be in a hospital environment, 1 would be in a care home, 1 would be a residential address where they'd gone home to die, and a district nurse comes out and finishes them off with a syringe driver, you know. So I went and I said, look, don't worry, I'll pick this loved one up quickly, get them back to the funeral home, give them a good pampering, a wash and a shave, and you know, close their eyes and then present them, and you can come and see them in the funeral home. So we went to Northampton. I know the staff there, I know them for a long time. When I worked for the co-op, half of it was out of Northampton. So I asked them, I said, why did you not let this family see their loved one? And I thought they'd be refurbing the viewing room or whatever. But the reason being, he opened the door and there was a big inflatable tent. And it was, I knew what it was a pandemic mortuary, because I'd seen them and kind of had knowledge of them. And I said, well, what's that for? And he said, well, we've heard there's something nasty coming. And he didn't say the word COVID, but he said there was something nasty coming. And that was in the first week of December of 2019. So I went away. What do? I kind of told my family, you might want to get some pasta in. I've been told there's something really nasty coming, you know, and the rest kind of unfolded. The mainstream media started showing us pictures of people falling over in China and told us there was a deadly pandemic coming, and the rest is history. We kind of know the story. And for the first 12, 16 weeks, I'll be honest, I was very frightened. You know, I was never a conspiracy theorist. I kind of remember, I cast my mind back to 9/11. And as a former engineer, I knew that that was a lie. I knew it was impossible. I wasn't quite sure how they pulled it off, what they were showing us on telly, because CGI was a fairly new thing back then, you know, but by today's standards, if you look at it, it's pretty primitive. But simply expecting an aluminium airframe to carve through buildings made of steel and concrete built to withstand earthquake, it's not rocket science, is it? You know, and I kind of wondered why, and thought, well, they're laundering money, it's an excuse to go and plunder another sovereign nation. And to illustrate that, since World War II, America have bombed or invaded 29 other countries. And yet we were told in World War II we weren't to war with Germany because they invaded Poland. That was enough, you know. So kind of coming to terms with the fact that we've actually been born on the side of the baddies as well. So it's been, it's been a bit overwhelming the last 4 years. But anyway, to get back on track was the first 3 or 4 months I was very frightened, and then I began to see through the lies, and there are a number of things that flagged up to me. So the first was a guy called John who called me, and that was in about March of 2020, and I would, you know, we were told we were picking up COVID cases and they were body bagged, and we were being as careful as we could possibly be, and I was wondering when I was going to get sick and die. You know, as an ex-smoker and being the age that I am, I thought I'm bound to die because we were being told it was so deadly, you know. And I'll be honest with you, I was probably quite keen to get a vaccine at that time, not knowing, you know, you were thinking they were talking about it, and I was frightened. And anyway, this guy called John rang me up and he said, my name's John. He said, I work for a government-sponsored company, and the name of that company is Pandemic Resilience, and the word resilience, it keeps popping up in these people's, I don't know what you would call it, but I keep hearing the word resilience. They use it all the while, and if you do a little search, you'll see what I mean. There's a pattern there. And he said, my job is to speak to all of the funeral directors in my list, whatever that list be. He said, and you are one of them. He said, and I'm going to call you every Monday, and he said, I want to know several things. It's part of the pandemic effort. Why would you not be willing to engage with that guy? You know, I was as keen as anyone else to see the end of it. And he asked me, first of all, how many people I could hold in my premises. So I told him, I'm not a particularly big funeral home, so that number is about 15. It's not huge, but that's the number. And then he asked me how many people I'd picked up that week, where from, and how many were COVID. And he would call me every Monday, and I knew he was going to call. And sometimes he would call me from a landline, and sometimes he would call me from a mobile number. And I've still got his mobile number, Pandemic Resilience John, on my phone. And almost straight away he started steering me. And I didn't like that. Now, the whole idea of having a pandemic resilience where you ring around to get the facts is to take down the facts as they're told, so that you know what the facts are and they're getting accurate numbers. And straight away he started steering me. And I'll give you an example. I'd say to him, well, this was at a time, bear in mind, that the doctors stopped attending deaths, and they were verifying over the phone. And I would say to him, I've picked a guy up from a care home. I've spoke to the family. He'd been there 5 years, he had onset dementia. And I spoke to the staff at the point of arrangement, and they said yes, he'd been there 5 years. There was no doctor in attendance because we were protecting the NHS, and these doctors were sitting at home on a pandemic payment with an headset on and double the money. So they were quite happy. There was no COVID test done. He wasn't a COVID death, he was onset dementia. He would actually admit down the phone he was putting him down as a COVID death. And I was, okay, John, why are you doing that? Because I've just told you he wasn't a COVID death. Oh, well, we've been told that in this big facility, there was one person who'd had given a positive COVID test and gone on to die in a care home. And from that point forward, we've been instructed everyone is to go down as a COVID death. And everyone was doing the same thing. They were paying big money out for anyone that went COVID on the death certificate. There were families that came into me that said they were offered the money for the funeral if they put COVID on the death certificate. They were paying money for everyone that went on ventilation. If I got the number for, in America, it was $39,000. The hospitals were paid by government for everyone that put on ventilation. So when you went into hospital, have a guess what they recommended you go straight on, ventilation. And I was hearing the same story from all of the families that came in. So families that came into me as a funeral director, let me explain. So it's a family-run business. It's me and my missus. I've got one guy back of house. But I engage with the families from the first phone call all the way through the whole process, and then I direct on the day as well. So at some point you get to know that family and you show an interest and you say, so what happened to mum? What happened to dad? And they would tell you, and they would have a story. And the COVID story was consistently always the same. Mum and dad didn't go into hospital with COVID. They went in with a chest infection. They went in with a water infection. They went in because they had a fall and broke their hip. Then they were spam testing them with a PCR test in there until they got a positive test. Then they were whisked away, put on ventilation, and died within 2 weeks. It was that same story every time. Nobody actually went into hospital with COVID. Then I found out about the sums of money that were being paid, and it just racked up and racked up and racked up. And I remember by about June, July, certainly no later than August, I knew it was a lie. I knew that something was very, very wrong. But what do? If you speak out at a time like that, you know, you could lose your business. And in the end, I ended up speaking out and started voicing concerns. And everyone mocked me. I lost all my mates. But something inside me just told me just to still go with it, because I knew that it was right. I knew that that's what was, you know, that's what was right. And I remember speaking to Clive, wherever he is, Clive DeCarl, very early on, and others, and then people were wanting to speak to me. More and more people were wanting to speak to me, so other people were hearing it. I had an email from a girl called Yvonne Myers, and she offered me $85,000 for an exclusive. And the way that worked is they would contractually tie me in and get my story, and then tell it out to the various organisations they said they had globally, and they would pay me $85,000 for that. And this is at the time when you've got all these doctors on the TV taking money to promote these vaccines, you know, knowing the harms it's doing. And I turned her down and I said, look, listen, I don't want no money. It's not about money. I'm happy to earn my own money. I can see there's something really not right here. And I'm happy to talk to you, I'm happy to tell you my story, but I don't want a penny, and I'm not signing an exclusive. And lo and behold, I didn't hear anymore then. You know? So anyway, in 2021, the 6th of January, they started vaccinating. And as I predicted, people started falling over in what I would call, that was pandemic numbers. But it was the people that were being vaccinated, it wasn't COVID victims. And I remember picking people up in body bags, and if you go to the hospital and they tell you someone's got TB or HIV or AIDS or any other really something very nasty, you know, you tend not to open the bag up because you believe them. But I was picking these people up and their body bag was probably half full of fluid, so they were half again as heavy, you know, so real difficulty pulling them over. And I was taking these people out of body bags and washing and dressing them, because they were losing their mum and dad over like a Zoom call, and I couldn't bring myself not to take them and treat them the way I would want my mum treated, you know. And I've since found out that the reason that there was, I couldn't understand, why is there so much fluid? And the reason for that is if you cast your mind back, they were treating people exclusively with a drug called remdesivir at the time. Now, remdesivir is an antiviral drug. Anthony Fauci used it extensively in Africa while he was trialling it, and what he was doing over there was he was treating asymptomatic African babies who were PCR tested for Ebola. Now, asymptomatic, and 53% of these babies died from multiple organ failure, because life is cheap in Africa. And that was where he did the test run for COVID. So what was happening was, with these COVID patients, they were treating them with remdesivir. Their kidneys and liver were failing, so their body couldn't process fluid, and they filled up with fluid. And that would pull in 10 litres of edema from their lungs because they were drowning, because their kidneys were dead. And there's your respiratory illness. And that's why these body bags were so full of fluid. I was pulling these people out of body bags, and they were bloated, all their features was bloated, and even being as gentle as you can, and I'm always gentle with people, but pulling them across, you would leave an imprint of your hand on their arm because they were so bursting with fluid, where their kidneys had been killed by the medicine. And indeed, when I was in hospital myself after being targeted in November of 2021, I took a phone call around October time from a guy from British Intelligence. And I'm very much, you know, yeah, I know I'm Batman, you know. But this guy was quite convincing, quite compelling, and I spoke to him for about 40 minutes. He was an older guy. He was a comms officer, so he wasn't a double agent, but he told me that I was right about what I was saying and that it was a military operation and that the young men that were coming over are UN troops. So make no mistake, they are UN troops, and when they feel they have enough here, they will deploy. You know, whether you choose to believe that, it really doesn't matter, you'll see. And when they deploy me, say, yeah, he was right, and there'll still be muppets that would clap on doorsteps. You know, that's the reality, but it is what I think it's got to go down that route now, for everyone to see the darkness then finally and then clamour for the light, hasn't it? But while I was in hospital, that was an interesting one. So he said to me that as a person of interest I would be targeted. And lo and behold, despite dressing people that were considered deadly and had COVID all over them and I never wore a mask because, you know, I'm asthmatic. You can't work in a mask if you're asthmatic. I fell ill and I became breathless and I went into hospital and despite us being shown pictures of hospitals being overrun, there was no one in there. It was like a ghost town. You know, the nurses were arguing over who emptied the bins. And I was seen straight away by triage and they asked me to do a PCR test and I said no, I politely declined. And she said, well, will you do a lateral flow? And I said, well, I'll spit on it, but you're not putting it up my nose. Did 3 of those. She said, no, you haven't got COVID, you know, 3 negative tests, but they put you on a COVID ward anyway. I said, well, why is that? If, you know, these are your tests, these are the tests that you're putting people on palliative care on the basis of. Are you telling me your tests are not reliable? Or, oh no, we just want to be sure. So I was whisked away and put on a COVID ward. And that was early hours of one morning, I can't remember the exact date now. But in the morning I had a consultant came round, a suave, good looking tan guy, and he sat on the end of the bed. He was about mid-50s. I'm here to save your life from COVID. Okay, so I kind of said to him, have you looked at my notes? I haven't got COVID. You know, these are the tests. I've had 3 of your tests. They're all negative. These are the tests that you're putting people on palliative care. Are you telling me your tests are faulty? Or oh, we just want to be sure. I said, well, how are we going to be sure? He said, want to start you on remdesivir? I was like, no. And he said, well, what you'll die with that? I said, well, I'll die then. You know, I'll die. And he said, I said, well, let me stop you there. I said, you tell me the clinical benefits of remdesivir to me as a respiratory patient, because I disputed that I had COVID. I said, while I look up the side effects of remdesivir and see if it's conducive to my recovery as a man struggling to breathe. Oh look, difficulty breathing, wheeziness, tight chest, kidney function, liver. I said, can you explain what benefit? And he just got up and walked away. And then I knew, you know, because these people, they'll talk bullshit right up until the point that you assert yourself and you make it quite obvious that you actually know what you're talking about. And as soon as you do that, they buckle away. They've got nothing about them because they know. They know that you know. You know, in the same way as if you catch a thief and you go, thief. And, you know, so he slunk away. And then about 4 hours later, I had a very skinny, nervous-looking girl sit on my bed. She said, hi, I'm whatever her name was, from Oxford University. She said, I'm here to save your life from COVID. Like, exact same line like it's come out of a book of Coercion, how to coerce and kill a patient, you know. And so we went through the same thing. I said, I haven't got COVID, I've had 3 of your tests. She said, well, I'm just here to save you. And I said, well, how are you going to save me then from COVID I haven't got? She said, well, we want to try you on 2 new trial drugs. You'll have to sign a waiver to be given them though. So I said, okay. I said, so you're going to save my life with 2 drugs that I have to sign a waiver for you to give me? But if you're dying and you're gasping for breath, of course, people haven't got that presence of mind. You know, they've, and I remember going on the way to hospital, they're trying to coerce me. We'll put you on ventilation as soon as you get in, you know. No, because I knew the ventilation, it blows your lungs out. and it makes you worse. But I was armed with the information. You can imagine if you don't know this information, we've been kind of brainwashed and conditioned, haven't we, to trusting these doctors and nurses, you know, and they are scumbags, they know, and I can tell you on my phone I've got over 100 nurses who've been in touch with me and left their details confirming they see what I see. Most of them are have left nursing because they cannot work like that. They can't give patients remdesivir, watch them die, and then be asked to do it again, rinse and repeat, week after week, because they know they're killing people, following government policy. So what do? They leave nursing. Who does that leave in the hospitals? The fucking psychopaths. And the agency nurses from Ghana, run by a ministerial company that all benefit, all creaming it. So this girl, she said, I want to offer you 2 drugs. I said, what drugs are they then? She said, baricitinib and tocilizumab, both used to treat chronic arthritis, I believe. So I said, I went through the same thing. I said, okay. I said, will you tell me the clinical benefits to me as a respiratory patient while I look at the side effects? Wheeziness, tight chest, difficulty breathing, swollen throat, swollen tongue, blisters and... What are you... And I said to her, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, come back tomorrow. Don't fucking bother, you know? Yeah. And I knew then I had to get out. And by then I'd kind of spoken out to so many people, well-known eminent people like Clive and others, and I'd had the luck really that they supported me, and I had Mark Sexton came in with a GP who agreed to advocate for me, and they got me out, and they even, I never forget, they rung my missus, that's how desperate they were to keep me in, to get her to sign me in, and told her down the phone that I would die within minutes. Now, if you put yourself in the position of my missus, imagine if a consultant, his name was Darapalli, Mr. Darapalli, he's a respiratory consultant at Milton Keynes Hospital, and he told my wife that I would die within minutes of leaving the ward without oxygen. It's a fucking miracle. Thank you. Yeah, that was his rhetoric, just went pop, yeah. And my son, who was only 11 at the time, had the foresight to record that conversation, which I've since shared with a couple of other people. I should have had the foresight to bring it today. And in fact, why I think about it, because I did bring something, these are the clots that we're finding inside people. It's a sealed container of formaldehyde. Please pass it round. Have a look at what, this came out of a carotid artery. So the way that works is when I embalm people, I do that via the carotid artery. I make an incision, an L-shaped nozzle goes in, we pump fluid in, and when we remove the nozzle, there is back pressure, and this flows out with the back pressure. Pass it round, pass it table to table. I would ask that I get it back though, when you're done with it. So anyway, they managed to get me out of the hospital. I shuffled out, you know, I was unwell for a few weeks. Whatever it was they nailed me with, they didn't quite give me enough. But I've seen it firsthand. I know what they're doing in there. I know the way it works. And what they do is, and I've had it recounted to me by a number of families. One was a girl called Chantel Stafford, and a family won't mind me telling you because they're very angry. So she went in with a minor procedure. They look at your vaccine status. Straight away they go on the attacks. You're really selfish. Do you realise you're killing people? These people are in here because of people like you. And of course, you're surrounded by COVID in here. Let us protect you while you're in here. And of course, she buckled. She had a jab and was dead 90 minutes later in the same hospital bed, 28 years old. You know, and her family know. And they cut her from the ankles to the hip looking for a clot that they knew they would find. Who do they go to? There is no one to go to. All the coroners know. They know the truth. They're totally complicit. They're totally complicit. And in fact, I wrote to the coroner and I said, listen, we're seeing loads and loads of young people coming in who've got clots inside them that I've never seen before. I know you've post-mortem them because we picked the body up off you. Do you need these samples? the samples that are in these tubes. I can supply them to you, and I didn't get a reply to the email. I emailed them because I wanted the paper trail, you know. I took a phone call from one of the girls in the office who isn't complicit. They must look at the numbers and know something is very wrong. But how many 40-year-olds die before it's normalised? Do you know, and to give you an example of that, I remember years ago, I'm 56, many of you are going to be younger, some of you are older, but about 20, 25 years ago there was a young African lad who died during a Premier or First Division game from heart failure, and there was almost a national day of mourning because it just didn't ever happen. And this guy died on live TV. That's how rare it was. And yet it constantly happens all the while now, to the point where they're putting defibs in fucking primary schools. Why are they doing that? Problem, solution. Create the problem, offer the solution. And that's where we are after these poisonous mRNA jabs that's killing people in record numbers. So what am I seeing now as a funeral director? I'm still busier than I should be. And it's a subjective thing, is it? Am I busy because I'm now running an established business and clearly doing a very good job at what I'm doing, and it's successful when the business is building? Or is it in line with the ONS data that they're desperately reformulated to hide the numbers? I would suggest that's what it is. And it's the numbers that I'm seeing and the ages of those numbers. So what they're doing is they're replicating heart attacks, cancers, strokes, and sudden unexplained death. Do you know the amount of coroner's paperwork that I see death unascertained on? We can send a telescope to the outer fucking regions of the galaxy. We can't find out where someone of 35 years old has suddenly died. It's death unascertained. It's beyond belief. It's ridiculous. And this is happening constantly now. I reached out to the coroner. I said, you know, we're getting all these clots. Well, the girl rang me up and said, I spoke to the pathologist. She said, he said that it's perfectly normal. He doesn't need you to keep the samples, and that this grows inside people when they die. So when you die, your arteries can fill up with rubber, apparently. You know, and not realising I actually fucking worked for the coroner for 7 of my 10 years at the co-op. So I know exactly what isn't normal, you know. The girl in the office obviously only relays what she's told. I kind of feel for them, but in their hearts, they must know the numbers are wrong. You know, to put it into context, when I worked for the co-op, the particular branch I was working at, there was 800 funerals a year, and out of those 800 funerals a year, I would say about half a dozen were under 50, because you just don't die. It's a very rare cancer, suicide, drug overdose, or a violent death is usually why youngsters die, you know. We're seeing them regularly now, to the point where I do about 160 funerals a year at my funeral home, and I've had half a dozen some months under 50. You know, at the moment I've got 2 in their 40s, obviously I can't go into detail, but 2 in their 40s and 1 in their early 50s. I've lost 6 of my mates in the last 18 months, all in their early 50s. People that I've grown up with. So clearly something is very, very, very wrong. And what's more concerning is not the fact that it's happening, but it's the reaction to trying to raise the alarm. They're totally gaslighting it, totally denying it. And this is, I mean, you've got Rishi Sunak banging his pen on the lectern, insisting these things are safe and effective, as his constituents die around him in record numbers. And he's got 370 million or whatever in this hedge fund in Moderna that was talked about earlier. It beggars belief. They're not even trying to hide it now. You know, now what are we going to do collectively? Now it's clear, as a man who worked on the door for 7 years, so there's no point in starting a physical fight that you have no hope of winning. Our greatest strength is our numbers and our collective will. And I believe that is what is going to see us through. And it says in the Bible, only the truth will set us free. So the part that we have to play really is waking the masses up just to the truth. And I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because what we're dealing with here is something that's very, very frightening. I'm frightened. I'm frightened more for you guys than I am for me, which is why I've spoken out with no consideration for myself. different people react differently to fear. Some people bury their head in the sand. Some people are in just denial. Some people run the fight or flight thing. Other people fight it, don't they? And I suppose I've always been a bit more of a backbone. And once you realise what they're doing, you understand that the price of saying nothing is far worse than actually speaking out. Because if we can get the numbers where there's too many of us for their huge new prisons, and their army of young men coming over, there's very little they can do. And at the very least, we're going to buy ourselves a lot more time, and that'll snowball. Because I can tell you now, they're not swamping to their banner, they're coming away from it, they're coming onto our side of the fence. And testimony to that is, I was on my own when I spoke out 4 years ago. I'm not now, am I? You know? So take heart from that. The other thing that I would say is, because I've been very... No, you should clap yourselves. You're all here. You're all making a stand. People next door would sit here and openly say they're all nuts next door. They won't be saying it in the coming days. Trust me. And I know. I'm an undertaker. I know who dies. I'm on the coalface. I'm putting them in coffins. It's vaccine recipients that are dying. That's the bottom line. So moving forward, I've had 3 peers that have contacted me in the last 16 weeks, right? One of them is, I can tell you his name is Lord Christopher Monckton. He openly told me they are flapping in Westminster. They're running around like headless chickens. And this is why you'll know, it's in the mainstream media, 121 serving MPs are no longer standing. Why do you think that is? Because they know they're going to come on top and they want to get as far away from it as they can. It's too fucking late. Every one of them will get nailed. So don't despair. Don't despair. You're going to be on the right side of history, same as me. Do I hope that I live to see it? Of course I do. But if I don't, I still feel very humbled to be a small cog in the big machine that's going to beat these bastards, because we will. I promise you it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So what I want to do for the last few minutes is just, if there are any questions and answers, now is the time to ask an undertaker. If you raise your hand, I'll try and pick all of you individually. Has anyone got a question?
Yeah.
So blood types, you would have to speak to someone who
Did you get COVID?
No, I was poisoned.
Why did you say that on your Facebook page?
I never had COVID.
You said you had COVID on your Facebook page.
No. Show me my Facebook page.
Okay.
Yeah. So, blood types. I couldn't tell you about the blood types purely because I don't. I make a point asking anyone that I feel might have been a COVID death if they've been vaccinated. They'll say the same thing. I don't ask them about their blood types. I'll be honest with you. It's the same as like asking them, have they been vaccinated? What vaccine did they have? I couldn't tell you. What I can tell you is at the meeting with Sir Graham Brady in Westminster in September of 2021, it was suggested that it's Russian roulette. So very early on, what happened was they put a lot of saline jabs out. And the reason for that, I could never understand, why would they put loads of saline out, is to recruit people as advocates. So if you've had say for example, you rock up for a jab and I give you saline, what adverse reaction are you going to suffer? None. So you're going to go home and you're going to tell everyone how wonderful it was. And that's advocated you to sell the jab. That's what they did. So a lot of people that have had jabs and might be sitting there frightened, don't be frightened, because if you're still alive and healthy now, there's a good chance you've got away with it. And it was said at the meeting, it is Russian roulette. Things that you can take, I've heard a variety of things, nattokinase, NAC, bromelain, that kind of thing. How effective they are, I really don't know. Good people to look at are Mike Yeadon, Dolores Cale, Dr. Tess Laurie and the Health Alliance. Check them out, because they're all really good people, all fighting really hard. Any other questions? Yes?
In relation to the COVID pandemic and what's going on now,
Yeah, so I think in order to, the COVID is only one part of the agenda. The rest of it is things like digital ID, cashless society. What they're going to do, I believe, there's two things. These guys have been told are UN troops. So I took calls from a number of the military personnel who have reached out to me. And one of them in particular was from the Black Watch. He said that they were training these guys in Antalya in Turkey. And my understanding is that Erdogan got cold feet and refused to do it anymore. And then they had loads of earthquakes in Turkey, didn't they? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. But then we're going off somewhere where some people just won't swallow it, but that's the reality. Yeah. Yes. So the babies is a very interesting one. There was a guy called, if you do a search for funeral director Wesley and baby deaths, he talks about that. And I reached out to this funeral director Wesley, and he confirmed what he'd seen, and I've seen it as a funeral director. Now, I couldn't understand how I'm hearing about these baby deaths, but I'm not actually seeing, the phone isn't ringing more for me as a funeral director. I'm hardly doing any. And I've been going down the crematorium, and in the crematorium there's a waiting room, and in the waiting room, and it's a common theme in all crematoria, there's a digital display, and it'll have all the funerals on there for the day, the names of them, and who the arranging funeral director is. All the baby deaths now at the local hospital is arranging them. So what used to happen was people would lose a baby, the bereavement team would deal with that baby, that baby's family, they would give them a list of certified funeral directors. They would then ring round the funeral directors, and as an undertaker, I don't charge anything for anyone that loses a child under 18. I will not profit from the death of a child. That isn't to be commended, that's what we should all fucking be doing, if someone loses a child. So, the phone isn't ringing, but there's loads of babies going through the crematorium, and every time it's Milton Keynes Hospital, locally, they're dealing directly with them now. Yeah. And I spoke to a guy who was working down there, who's no longer there, but he told me they're going down to the hospital and they're picking up 4 or 6 babies a week. You know? Yeah, so what we would see initially with the vaccine rollout is they're vaccinating expectant mothers. So the stillbirth rate would have gone through the roof, but these women now cannot get pregnant because they've been sterilised. So the death rate in babies is going to go down to what appear normal levels, because you can only lose a child if you can get pregnant. Do you get me? And these girls have not only lost the child they had, but they've been sterilised now. They won't get pregnant. So it's going to be very difficult to pin down the numbers on baby deaths. Yes, sir?
Do you know the exact mechanism for action for what is causing the fibrous blood clot?
No, I don't. I've looked at various reports. A really good one was the Epoch Times, and obviously these clots are being built by the body. So they are the same fundamental building blocks that normal blood is made of, but there are vastly different quantities of those elements in these clots to normal blood. To illustrate, there's quite a lot of iron in normal blood. There's virtually hardly any iron in these clots. And they are like white, I mean, you'll have seen this thing going around the table. They're like fibrous. They remind me very much of, I've talked about them being like calamari. So if you Google shortage of heparin, which is a drug that they use to break down blood clots or to thin the blood, the heparin's not going to touch these because they're not normal blood clots. So anyone who wants to reach out to me, I can send them the report from Epoch Times with what it actually is, what it's going to solve for you. I really don't know. It's the same sort of things. Like there's quite a lot of magnesium in there, but not much iron, and I can't recall the different amounts of each element in these clots, but very different to a normal clot. And certainly as a man who's worked as an undertaker for 18 years, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've got an embalmer who works for me who's BIE certified, who's done 23 years, and he's never seen anything like it. And I regularly attend online meetings with a dozen or so other embalmers globally, New Zealand, Australia, and they saying the same thing. you know, so yeah, that's where we are with that. Any other questions? This one in the middle of the balloon.
No, it's just about the babies. I'm a bird keeper, I know we were talking earlier.
Yes.
But what I'm finding with what's happening with vaccinated mothers is, even if they get pregnant, when the placenta takes over at 16 weeks, it's not strong enough, and that's when they're miscarrying.
Yes.
And then also, if the babies are born, they're typically born prematurely.
Yes.
And then the placentas are like webbing.
Yes.
Not fully formed.
I would say the same thing. I've had a lot of midwives reach out to me and say the same thing. They can physically see the clots in the placentas. The babies are being born early and sick. Yes, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned obviously having a relationship with families and stuff all the time.
Yes.
Have you noticed over the last couple of years then there's a sense of people
Waking up.
They have no idea.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, they are.
Like children in beds, dead in the water.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
at the time, no comprehension.
Yes.
Hopefully after a couple of years.
Yes, they're definitely, I'm noticing more and more people are coming to me, and they're actually, and you have to remember, if you put yourself in my shoes, as a funeral director, I'm not there as a fucking conspiracy theorist. I have to tread quite carefully. So I'm there to look after that family, and for example, if I get a family come in, and it will be parents in their 60s and they've lost a 38-year-old son, I'm not there saying, by the way, I think your son was murdered by the state. But if they ask me, are you seeing any other young deaths and are they getting thrombosis, then you can guarantee they've looked into it and they have got an idea. And then I'll be gently honest and, well, yeah, I am seeing lots of young deaths, and yes, there are lots of unusual thrombosis. They're then asking me, where do I go with that? What do I tell them? The normal route would be the coroner. And to explain, if I collect a deceased from the hospital, I have a moral obligation to raise concerns. Say, for example, I get this deceased back and I roll this deceased over, and there's a puncture wound in the back, or a knife hanging out their back, or a bullet hole that they haven't mentioned in the paperwork, and I raise concerns. I have to raise those concerns, and I do that for two reasons. One, as a decent fucking human, and number two, I have a legal obligation to do so, because where I suspect there might have been a crime or I've got concerns, I have to raise those concerns. That's what the coroner is there to investigate. They're not doing their job. They're not doing their job. Because when I've raised those concerns, I mean, to give you an idea, I first raised my concerns to the local coroner. I took the phone call that I talked about earlier, they poo-pooed it. Subsequent emails have been totally ignored. I then went to the Chief Coroner of England and I CC'd in about 30 other people, and include, I believe, Mike Eden and Dolores Kale and Tess Law and a couple of others were in the email. I can't remember now the exact list of names, but I put them in there to put pressure to get a reply. 3 weeks later, no reply, so I emailed again. You know, what are you doing about all these thrombosis deaths? I'm seeing them, I'm really concerned. And I got a reply back that basically said, we follow government policy. So it didn't deny it. And they follow government policy. It's like the most revealing email without revealing anything, you know. So that's kind of where we are on that. Yeah.
There's something funny about coroners.
Mate, they all know. They know the truth. That, you know, I'm not, and that's the mistake that I made. I'll be honest. When I first spoke out, I thought everyone else would say, yeah, we're seeing that as well. It's got to stop. They never. All they're bothered about is their fucking bank account and their direct debits. And in the case of the doctors, the money they're earning. I mean, the doctors were earning phenomenal money. They could do 100 jabs a day, £10 a jab, tax-free. So they can earn, Monday to Friday, £5,000 tax-free a week. A week, 20 grand a month. Why would they want to ruin that? They couldn't believe their luck. But then the downside of that is the same people they're vaccinating are then presenting days later with myocardia, or 4 weeks later with stage 4 cancer. Now, it's all very well being intimidated into keeping a secret, I get that, and being reluctant. How long do you keep that secret for before you actually become complicit in the crime? What's acceptable? Do you keep that secret for a month? Could you get away with that in a court of law? So, well, I weren't sure for the first month. We're like sort of 3 years in now, since the rollout, they're all in up their necks. And they've got their Range Rovers, and they've got their Porsche Boxster that their missus wouldn't let them have. And they've got their new house. And they're deeply complicit. So they're going to have the conviction of a Japanese soldier on a Pacific island in 1960, still fighting the war. Of course they are, because the option for them is prison time and being ruined, isn't it? Because they've been complicit in murdering their own patients, knowingly. So, yes, mate.
Do you see the incidence of adverse events being more with the mRNA vaccines more than the AstraZeneca or Johnson?
To be honest with you, I would have to know on an individual basis. I can tell you now, they're all poisonous, they're all dangerous, and we were told that at the meeting I had with Sir Graham Brady. So I'll explain a little bit more about that meeting for those that weren't aware. I took a phone call in just before being targeted, but in September of 2020, from a guy called Mark Sexton, who's a retired police constable, who you will all know, and he's a wonderful guy. And he invited me to a meeting in Westminster. Present at the meeting were Dr. Tess Laurie, Professor Dolores Cale, Dr. Sam White, Dr. Stephen Frost, Anna de Bisseret sat next to me, Sir Graham Brady, Sukarit Bhakdi. There were a number of others. My apologies to those people. I can't recall all of the names off the top of my head on the spot. And we all had 5 or 10 minutes to sit and tell Sir Graham our concerns. Casting my mind back to that time and knowing what I knew, I said to him there were no more deaths than normal in 2020. They relabelled a lot of deaths. And then the moment the needles went in arms, people started falling over, the people that had been injected. And then I listened as it went round the table and other people said their bits. And I watched reams and reams of evidence be given to Sir Graham, and it was said that there would be a massive death rate in vaccine recipients. It told them, they told him how these people would die, the fact it would be heart attacks and cancers. They went into the mechanisms, they gave him reams and reams of evidence, and I sat there in disbelief, you know, because I knew what I knew, having gone there, but I just couldn't believe. And Sir Graham's face was ashen. He knew, and we all knew that he knew. And the mistake I made, I think, we went there thinking, oh, at last someone's listening. You know, it'll stop. And we went there, he knew, he was there just to find out what we knew and report back. And then he was actually a lot more forthcoming than he need have been. He was a bit stupid really, but I think he was, me aside, he was in a room full of intellectuals. You know, I don't consider myself an intellectual, but these people are all far cleverer than me. And they were all looking at him and they made him look stupid. And he openly admitted, he said, it's above my pay grade, I can't stop it, I will do what I can, but I can't promise anything. And then he left. And so, of course, we sat there and we were like, this is the commissioner of the 1922 committee. So for those who are not sure, let me explain. The 1922 committee is a group of senior MPs who sit in the background and they hire and fire prime ministers. So they hired and fired Boris the alley cat, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, and then have got rid of him. So there is no one more senior than the commissioner of this group. And yet he openly said, it's well above, not above my pay grade, well above my pay grade. So clearly, there is no democracy. There is no democracy. It doesn't matter whether it's Tory or Labour, it's two sides of the same globalist coin, and they will carry on the instruction from upstairs and do what they're told to do. It doesn't matter, red or blue, it's the same people. There is pointless voting. And what I would urge everyone to do is write, I do not consent through their ballot paper. There is no one to vote for. And Sir Graham Brady, he openly admitted that. It's well above his pay grade. And the rest is history. So it was said there, the mechanisms that the people would die from, and I didn't quite believe it. I was quite horrified. You can imagine sitting there and listening to it. What was racing through my mind, I couldn't believe. It wasn't the outcome of the meeting I thought I was going to get. And that's what's happened ever since. You know, more and more of these youngsters are dying. It's commonplace. Newsreaders on live TV are falling over dead. famous sports stars and celebrities are just dropping down dead in record numbers, and still they're insisting it's safe and effective and rolling out spring boosters and benefiting to the tune of millions. So all I can do is tell you that I will keep telling the truth and what I'm seeing, and you know, hopefully we'll be on the right side of history and enough of us will be able to make a difference. Yes, mate.
Just one more. When we see with organisations like these,
Sorry, I can't hear you.
with the Forum,
I can't hear you. Guys, can you just give me... I just want to listen to...
with the World Economic Forum and the WHO,
Yeah.
they've been talking about releasing more mRNA vaccines for like vitamin D and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any predictions to see what will come for the future?
I don't take any vaccine of any shape or form. It's that simple. If you do, and it's on the mRNA platform. I'll tell you another interesting one. So, my son is in year 8 in school. Last year in year 7, he started a new secondary school. And I preemptively emailed the school because they have a vaccination nurse and an immunisation policy. And I spoke to the school directly via an email. And I do that because you want a paper trail. And I said, look, I'm a local funeral director. I'm seeing loads of deaths from vaccines. Don't touch my son. This is notice of that. So anyway, I didn't get a reply to the email, surprise, surprise, but took a phone call. And that phone call was from a girl called Sarah, who's the immunisation nurse at Hazley School in Milton Keynes, for the record. And Sarah introduced herself, told me she was the immunisation nurse, and she was calling me about the email that I'd sent. So I told her what I'd been through as a funeral director during COVID and what I'd seen, and I thought that she would be horrified and shocked. She actually opened, she went, yes, I know the risks. I was like, okay. I said, so Sarah, have you got kids yourself? She went, yes, I've got 2, and I think she said they were 10 and 8. I said, would you have them vaccinated? Oh, no. Okay, I said, so you know the risks, you've got your own kids that you won't have vaccinated, but you'll vaccinate my fucking kids. Oh, well, it's my job. And this is what the problem that we got. Lots of good people doing really bad things because it's their job. And because they're being paid to do it. Do you know, I then went in a chemist a short while after, and I'm there in the queue to go and get some painkillers for my back. And a woman walks in with a lanyard on, and she's clearly a council carer. And she announced, I'm here for, and his name was John, this old boy, I'm here to give John his COVID vaccine. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck go, you know. So I waited while they got it ready, and I pulled her aside. I said, listen, I'm a local funeral director. I've seen loads of people that are coming after, dying after having a vaccine. Yes, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? And I was like, okay. I said, so you know? She said, yes. I said, well, why would you bring him in to give it to him then? And this old boy's standing there. He's obviously got early onset dementia. It's my job. These people are fucking insane. And they wouldn't get their own family's vaccine, but they'd do yours, and they'd do yours. So really, all I can say to you is I think the most awake of us just have to resist for as long as we possibly can and try and generate the numbers in the people that are still asleep. You know, and if I think the biggest mistake these thank you, darling, these globalists could make now is to roll out these young men, because I think it might wake up more people. So I kind of part of me wants it to come to an end and that to happen, because I think it's only when it gets really dark that perhaps people will clamour to get back to the light, you know. Because I can tell you, a lot of these people, they've got a moral compass inside them, but they've lost their way. They've been lured in by money and the greed, and they played a very, for example, trying to tell people about the evils that's going on in hospitals. Think about that for a moment. They had you on doorsteps banging pots and pans for heroes. Imagine how difficult it is to convince people of the truth. And they did that knowing what was coming. So it's been very carefully thought about and very carefully planned, hasn't it? You know, and there was a very interesting, I suspect they'll be coming after me very shortly as well. So the story behind that is, do you remember the Legacy Funerals in Hull story recently? That was the funeral company, they said, consisted of 3 branches, and it was a horror story in there for whatever reason, and they'd taken 34 deceased out of those branches and shut them down, and that was the story. Now, they operate on a system of problem solution, don't they? So what that generates is the need for legislation and regulation in funeral homes, doesn't it? Yeah. So now we just received an email saying we're due an inspection on the back of that story. So I did no more. I don't believe that was a real funeral home. So I went to Company's House and I looked at their books, and you can do that. So if you put Legacy Funeral Homes, Hull, Company's House, you can have a look at their accounts. To put things in perspective, we run a single funeral home, right? My turnover is about £350,000 to £400,000 a year. Turnover, not profit. And this company had been running 5 years longer than me, had 3 branches, and I've only got 1. They made £5,000 profit in 2021 during the pandemic. It's a bullshit story, but what it's done is it's generated the need for legislation and regulation to come after people like me. So I've got an inspection on June the 17th where Health and Safety and the NAFD or the SAIF representative is coming out to inspect my funeral home on the back of that story. I can tell you now I will fail that inspection because that's what the whole thing was all about, you know. And to put things into, so you understand a bit more, there are 2 bodies that oversee the funeral industry, but only in an advisory capacity. It's totally unregulated, believe it or not. So when I set up as a funeral director, when I worked for the car, I worked back of house, and I thought, well, I'll open my own place. I'm going to get all the licenses you need and whatever you need. You don't need anything. It's an entry-level retail category, A1. It's harder to get a sweet shop because you're selling things that people eat in a sweet shop. Unbelievably, yeah. So there is no regulation, but there are 2 bodies that you can be part of that are advisory. One is the NAFD, or the National Association of Funeral Directors. The other one is called SAIF, or SAIF. Now, I was a member of SAIF, and I was suspended in 2021 for bringing them into disrepute for speaking about the vaccines. So you can guarantee that when this health and safety guy comes up with the safe guy to inspect my program, I know what's going to happen. So all I can do is kind of make sure I make it as difficult as possible for them to close me down. But that visit is scheduled for the 17th of June. So watch this space. Watch this space. And I knew, when I looked on Company's House and I saw that someone with a business 3 times the size of mine made £5 grand in 2021, you know that's a bullshit story, and whoever put the fake figures up doesn't know anything about funeral homes. Do you know, it is what it is. It is what it is. Do we have any last questions before we close? Yes. Yes.